In 2008, in the small town of Hayville, located in the heart of Virginia, life went on as usual. This town, with a population of just over 2,000 people, was a place where time seemed to stand still. Narrow streets, neat houses with white fences, and green hills on the horizon created an atmosphere of quiet, measured life. Here, everyone knew his neighbor, and news spread faster than in any modern metropolis. Late in the evening, when the sun had already hidden behind the horizon and the soft light of street lamps flooded the narrow sidewalks, Thomas Wright, one of the old-timers of Hayville, was returning home after another meeting of the local chess club. That night, as usual, he walked leisurely along the main street, enjoying the cool air and listening to the rustling of the leaves. However, while passing by the Jenkinson family home, something caught his attention. The Jenkinsons' house always looked well kept, with a neat garden and light filtering softly through the curtains. But today everything was different. The house was in darkness, except for one bright spot of light coming from the kitchen. The window was slightly open, and Thomas thought he heard muffled sounds. Perhaps someone had left the TV on, but for some reason this alarmed him. Stopping, he walked closer to the window, feeling strangely uneasy. His gaze slid over the familiar interior of the kitchen, and suddenly his heart skipped a beat. A woman lay motionless on the floor, her face hidden behind long strands of hair. The blood, spreading in a thick stream across the tiles, stood out brightly against the background of the light furniture. It was Sarah Jenkinson. Thomas didn't remember pulling out his phone and dialing 911. His hands were shaking and his voice was weak, but he managed to explain the situation. While waiting for the police to arrive, he could not take his eyes off the window, where Sarah's motionless body lay in eerie silence. Everything that was happening seemed unreal, like a scene from a nightmare. When the police arrived, the entire street was already shrouded in the flickering light of flashing lights. The police cordoned off the area, preventing anyone from approaching. Thomas had to move away, but he could not take his eyes off what was happening. Soon Sarah's body was taken out of the house, and everyone understood that this was the end of a quiet life in their small town. Sarah Jenkinson was known and loved by many. She had a husband, Jack Jenkinson, who worked for a construction company, and a young son, Jake, who was barely 5. No one could believe that something like this could happen to such a family. But the creepiest thing about this story was that evening no one heard any screams or sounds of struggle. Everyone, as one, insisted that they did not suspect anything. This night marked the beginning of a story that would soon shake the entire city and reveal secrets that no one could have imagined. The next day, Hayville woke up in shock. The death of Sarah Jenkinson, a woman whom many knew as a caring mother and devoted wife, was a real shock to the residents of the town. The police had already begun their investigation, and every resident understood that soon dark secrets could be revealed in this calm and cozy corner. The investigation was led by Detective James Walker, an experienced officer with over 20 years of police service. Walker was known for his keen mind and ability to find the smallest details that usually escaped the eyes of others. That is why he was chosen to handle this complicated case. This was an unusual case for Hayville. Such tragedies were extremely rare here, and local police rarely encountered anything more serious than thefts and minor crimes. The first hours of the investigation passed in a tense atmosphere. Walker began by touring the Jenkinson home, carefully examining each room for clues. The crime scene left no doubt. The murder was committed in cold blood and, apparently, without unnecessary noise. However, despite the brutality of the incident, there were no signs of forced entry or struggle in the house. This led to the assumption that the killer knew the victim and could freely get inside. During his inspection, Walker came across several important details. The first thing that caught my eye were shoe prints on the kitchen floor that did not belong to either the victim or her husband. They were barely noticeable, but for an experienced detective, this was the first clue. These traces pointed to who was in the house at that fateful moment. Then a strange detail caught his attention. Sarah's ring, which was always on her finger, was now lying on the table. It looked like a deliberate act, as if the killer wanted to leave a message. But what did it mean? Why was the ring removed? While Walker delved into the evidence, Other officers began interviewing witnesses. Residents of the street where Sarah lived were shocked and scared. None of them could believe that something like this could happen in their quiet town. Neighbors described Sarah as a friendly and helpful woman who always helped others. However, when the conversation turned to her husband Jack, the mood of many changed. Jack Jenkinson, a middle-aged man with a stern look and a strong build, was not popular among his neighbors. He was reclusive, rarely went outside, and preferred to spend time in his workshop. Some neighbors mentioned that they had heard Jack quarreling with Sarah more than once. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Green, even said that she recently saw Sarah leaving the house in tears after another quarrel. This testimony immediately attracted the attention of Detective Walker. Jack Jenkinson soon became the main suspect in this case. At first glance, all the evidence pointed to him: a tense relationship with his wife, the lack of an alibi for the time of the crime, and even the mysterious insurance that Sarah took out for a large amount shortly before her death. These facts made him the most likely candidate for the role of murderer. Jack was detained for questioning. Walker knew that they had a hard job ahead: to prove Jack's guilt or innocence without missing a single detail. Jack himself denied any involvement, claiming that he was in his workshop that evening and knew nothing about what had happened. His behavior evoked mixed feelings in the detective. On the one hand, Jack looked genuinely shocked. On the other hand, his isolation and dissatisfaction with the police were visible to the naked eye. Local residents began to share their guesses and rumors. Hayville gradually sank into an atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust. People began to avoid Jack. His son, little Jake, stopped playing with the neighbor children. The Jenkinson family found themselves isolated. Each new day brought new rumors, but the truth was still far away. Detective Walker knew he had a lot of work ahead of him. This whole situation was like a complex puzzle with key pieces missing. But he was sure: you just need to get to the bottom of the truth, and then this puzzle will come together. The only question was how unexpected this truth would be. Once Jack Jenkinson came under suspicion, Detective James Walker decided to concentrate all his efforts on collecting evidence that could either confirm or refute his involvement in the murder. He knew that in order to build a convincing case, he needed to carefully study all aspects of the Jenkinsons' lives, as well as the events that could lead to the tragedy. Walker's first step was to study the family's financial situation. This was standard procedure, as many crimes occur against a backdrop of financial hardship or ulterior motives involving money. The detective's attention was drawn to the insurance that Sarah took out shortly before her death. The amount that had to be paid in the event of her death was significant: more than $200,000. This fact immediately raised suspicions. Could Jack kill his wife for the sake of this money? Police have requested the family's financial records and have also begun checking phone calls and messages that could shed light on the relationship between Jack and Sarah in the final months before her death. They also seized computers and other devices to check email communications. Detectives were looking for any signs of threats, blackmail, or other reasons that could lead to the tragedy. While Walker examined financial documents, his team began a more detailed examination of evidence at the crime scene. The Jenkinson home was re-inspected with special attention paid to details that may have been missed during the first inspection. Officers carefully searched for any clues that might indicate the presence of an intruder in the house that night. It was then that they discovered new evidence that raised serious doubts in Walker. In the far corner of the basement, behind a pile of old boxes, a small knife with a bloody blade was found. The blood on the knife matched that of Sarah Jenkinson, making it the main weapon in the crime. However, there were no fingerprints on the scabbard, indicating that the killer likely knew how to leave no trace. But the most interesting was yet to come. Video footage from surveillance cameras installed on neighboring streets has finally been analyzed. The footage from the night of the murder shows Jack Jenkinson returning home. The time on the recording coincided with the alleged time of the murder, which added weight to the theory of his guilt. But upon further study of the recording, a suspicion arose that something was wrong with it. The recording time seemed slightly adjusted, and some shots seemed too smooth, as if they had been deliberately edited. This moment alerted Walker. If someone actually tried to tamper with the videotape, it meant that the killer was trying to frame Jack. But who could have the access and skills to do it undetected? There were more questions than answers, and the detective felt that somewhere in this tangle of lies the truth was hidden. Meanwhile, interviews with neighbors continued. New details have emerged. Mrs. Green, the same neighbor who saw Sarah in tears after a quarrel with her husband, remembered that a few days before the murder, a man came to the Jenkinsons. He was dressed in dark clothes, his face was hidden by a hood, and he left no impression on Mrs. Green other than his mysterious appearance. She did not see him enter or leave the house, but his presence added mystery to the matter. Detective Walker began to suspect that things might not be as simple as they seemed at first glance. He knew that if Jack had really been guilty, he wouldn't have left evidence against himself so clumsily. On the other hand, all these oddities, including the falsified notes and the found knife, could indicate an elaborate plan by someone else who wanted suspicion to fall on Jack. These discoveries presented new challenges for Walker. Now he needed to find out who could fake the video recording, who benefited from Sarah's death, and why this person tried so hard to frame her husband. The investigation was entering a new phase, where every step could lead to exposure or even greater confusion. With each new piece of evidence, the case became more and more complicated, but Walker was confident that he was getting closer to a solution. He knew that the key to the solution was hidden in the little things, and he was ready to go to the end to reveal the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. Detective James Walker couldn't shake the feeling that something important was eluding his attention. All the evidence found in the Jenkinson house at first glance pointed to John as the culprit. However, Walker's intuition told him that everything was not so simple. There were too many small details that did not add up to a logical picture. And the further he delved into the case, the more convinced he became that this was not just a murder, but a well-planned trap. Having analyzed everything collected up to this point, Walker decided to study the case materials again, but this time with special attention to details that could indicate outside interference. He decided to start by studying the video recordings that raised so many questions in him. He knew that any discrepancies or oddities in the notes could be a clue. Along with a team of technical experts, Walker spent several hours studying every second of the recording, slowing it down and checking the timestamps. It turned out that his intuition was correct. The video recording was indeed altered, and although at first glance it was almost imperceptible, upon detailed analysis, experts were able to detect traces of editing. Several frames were clearly inserted to make it appear as if Jack was near the house at the time of the murder. This discovery shocked Walker. If someone could so skillfully fake a video recording, it meant they had access to high-tech equipment and a serious motive for such a step. He began to wonder who could have such skill and desire to frame John. Meanwhile, the financial investigation also bore fruit. The Jenkinsons' bank accounts were scrutinized, and another oddity soon emerged. Shortly before Sarah's murder, a large sum of money was transferred from her account to an unknown account registered in the name of a certain James Carver. This name was not known to either Jack or his circle, and it did not appear in Sarah's life. This aroused the detective's suspicions, and he decided to find out who James Carver was. The check showed that James Carver was the pseudonym under which a certain man was operating, related to shady business and associated with several criminal gangs in the area. This discovery opened up a new aspect of the case. Sarah may have been involved in something dangerous that led to her death. Walker began to study Sarah's connections and surroundings. It turned out that she had a friend from the past whom she knew before marriage, Alex Miller. Alex was her first love, but their relationship ended badly. At that time, he was interested in illegal affairs, and after their breakup, he completely went into the criminal world. It turned out that Alex had recently returned to the city and was seen near the Jenkinson house a few days before the murder. His return was not accidental. This information became a real revelation for Walker. Alex Miller, a man with a rich criminal history, could have all the necessary connections and resources to organize the faking of video recordings and falsification of evidence. But the question remained: why? Delving deeper into Alex's past, Walker discovered that he had a strong motive for revenge. It turns out that Sarah didn't just abandon him, she refused his help when he was on the verge of life and death, which, according to Alex, was the cause of his subsequent problems. For him, killing Sarah was a way to take revenge for past wrongs, and framing Jack was the perfect way to ruin the life of someone who, in his opinion, took everything from him. But how was Alex able to get close to Sarah and frame Jack? The questions multiplied. Walker decided to personally interrogate Alex, who had already been placed under surveillance. Alex behaved confidently, even impudently, and answered all Walker's questions with a grin, hinting that he would never be able to prove his guilt. This interrogation only strengthened the detective's suspicions. Alex knew that he was one step ahead, and his impudence only confirmed this. However, Walker was not going to give up. He realized that he had enough reason to continue the investigation in this direction and collect more evidence that could link Alex to the murder. Meanwhile, rumors about the Jenkinson's case were spreading more and more in Hayville. Society was divided. Some continued to believe in Jack's guilt. Others doubted the official version and waited for the truth. The pressure on Walker increased every day, but he was sure that the truth was already close, and only one thing was needed: to continue to dig deeper to bring to light those dark secrets that were hidden behind the facade of an ideal town. The investigation gained momentum, and Detective James Walker became increasingly convinced that Alex Miller was not only connected with the murder of Sarah Jenkinson, but was also its organizer. However, direct evidence linking him to the crime was still lacking. Walker knew that in order to convict Alex, it would take more than just suspicions and guesses. Working at night, the detective immersed himself in studying interrogation records, financial reports, and evidence, hoping to find the thread that would tie everything together. He needed to find a way to prove that Alex not only organized the forgery of video recordings and falsification of evidence, but was also directly involved in the murder. The key point was new evidence. One of Alex's acquaintances, who previously worked in one of the underground businesses, decided to cooperate with the police in exchange for a reduced sentence in another case. The man, whose name was kept secret for his safety, said Alex had been discussing a plan to get revenge on Sarah for months, and was even looking for someone who could solve the problem. This witness reported that Alex contacted a certain James Carver, who specialized in doing dirty work for various criminal groups. This match with the name to which a large sum of money had been transferred from Sarah's bank account became an important piece of evidence. James Carver was essentially the perpetrator who not only committed the murder but also helped Alex frame Jack. Walker was soon able to confirm Alex's connection to Carver through phone records and correspondence found on Alex's phone, which was seized during his arrest. Among the messages, correspondence was discovered in which a plan to eliminate Sarah and frame Jack was discussed. This evidence became key in the case. The next step was to find Carver and interrogate him. Walker knew that Carver, having learned about Alex's capture, would try to escape. Therefore, the police launched a large-scale operation to search for him, bringing all available resources to the case. Carver was found a few days later in an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. He was ready to escape, but the police took him by surprise. Carver resisted arrest but was eventually detained and taken to the station for questioning. During interrogation, Carver did not immediately admit to what he had done. However, when Walker presented him with all the evidence he had collected, including correspondence and witness statements, Carver realized that he had no choice. Under threat of serious punishment, he agreed to cooperate and detailed how Alex Miller hired him to kill Sarah and frame her husband. According to Carver, Alex was obsessed with revenge. He carefully planned everything from faking video recordings to leaving evidence that pointed to Jack. Alex knew that Jack would be the prime suspect due to his relationship problems with Sarah and the insurance she took out. Carver kept his part of the deal, but did not expect the police to be on his trail so quickly. Carver's confession was the culmination of the investigation. Detective Walker finally has all the evidence he needs to charge Alex Miller. The truth came out, and it became clear that Jack Jenkinson was just a pawn in this brutal revenge plan. When Alex was questioned again and charged, he kept his cool. However, this time his confidence was broken. He realized that the game was over, and now he had to answer for his crimes. Meanwhile, Jack, who had been under investigation all this time, was released from custody. Despite the fact that he was not charged, a shadow of suspicion remained over him and his family for a long time. The incident deeply shocked Hayville. The town, which was accustomed to a quiet and peaceful life, found itself in the center of dramatic events. Residents began to wonder how dangerous hidden secrets could be and how one person's revenge could destroy the lives of many. For Detective Walker, this investigation was one of the most difficult in his career. It required from him not only professional skills, but also intuition, determination, and the ability to discern the truth where it is hidden behind lies and deception. However, he was satisfied that he was able to solve the case and bring justice. After the arrest of Alex Miller and James Carver, life in Hayville slowly began to return to normal. But the shadow left by this terrible crime hung over the city for a long time. People continued to discuss what had happened, wondering how such a nightmare could happen in their quiet and peaceful town. But most importantly, they began to understand how easy it is to be drawn into a web of lies and deception, even if it seemed that everyone around them was familiar and predictable. Jack Jenkinson, whose name has been cleared of charges, has returned home to his son Jake. But their life will never be the same. Although Jack was not guilty of his wife's death, the rigors of the investigation, time spent under suspicion, and public opinion left deep wounds on his soul. He knew he could never forget the night his life changed forever. The neighbors, who had previously been convinced of his guilt, began to look at him with a feeling of guilt. They realized how easy it is to be swayed by first impressions and how scary it is to be unfairly accused. Many of them tried to support Jack and Jake, but there was still a certain distance between them. Jack decided to sell his house and move to another city, hoping that a new place would allow him to start life with a clean slate. For Detective James Walker, the case was a reminder of the importance of following your intuition and not giving in to pressure, even when it seems obvious. He knew that if it weren't for his persistence, Jack Jenkinson could have spent the rest of his life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Walker felt satisfied that the truth had prevailed, but it was a bitter satisfaction because he understood that no one could return Sarah to her little son. In court, Alex Miller admitted his guilt, but remained cold and indifferent to the end. He never expressed remorse for what he had done, and his only goal was revenge, which he felt was justified. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. James Carver also received his sentence, but his punishment was less severe because he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. This story left a deep imprint, not only on the fates of its participants, but throughout Hayville. People began to think about how little they could know about their loved ones and how dangerous it was to keep grudges and hatred inside. The city gradually came to its senses, but the memory of what happened in 2008 remained in the hearts of its residents forever. The conclusion of the case became a kind of lesson for everyone who followed its progress. A lesson that the truth can be hidden behind the most ordinary things, and that revealing it requires not only professionalism, but also human understanding, empathy, and the determination not to stop until justice is achieved. Hayville fell back into its routine, but the town would never be the same again. The incident reminded everyone that even in the quietest corners, the darkest secrets can hide, and that behind the apparent calm there can be a real storm, ready to burst out at any moment.